It bothers me. It blows my mind. You pay for car insurance. You pay for home insurance. You pay for life insurance. You pay for health insurance. We have all these things. And then something happens and you don't have any insurance for your career, which is funding all the other insurances.
Money is a funny thing. You never really touch it, but all of us put so much of our identity and our worth in it. And it literally impacts every aspect of our lives. And so when I say that money is a taboo topic because it literally reveals every single thing about us, I'm talking about your tendency to be very selfish, your tendency to unforgive, your tendency to be generous, your tendency to be kind. Like that'll all be revealed through money.
The idea of job security is outdated as a landline. If you haven't been in a search for a while, it's probable you will at some point, by choice or not. Most executives admit to staying way too long, or sense what's coming, and justify staying anyway. There's another reason. The faulty belief that navigating to what's next will inevitably be worse and has to suck. Screw that. Lauren Greif has spent a lifetime in corporate and executive search, calling bullshit on stale career advice that most still use. This is Career Blast in a Half, the career podcast for executives ready to cut past outdated career advice to fuel your outcomes now. So let's go.
Right up there with talking about all those private topics like our sex life and maybe like some things that we don't necessarily want to bring to the surface. Discussing money and our relationship with money is not exactly something that I, for myself, and according to our guest, isn't necessarily something that people are comfortable with. We have Dave Wan on the show today, and Dave Wan is a TEDx speaker, and his topic is You're Not Bad with Money. But his backstory is really why we're here, because his focus is really about helping to create workplace wellness and also emotionally, financially stable and clear abilities to be able to work through some of the psychological pieces that underlie a lot of our buying decisions for the better and maybe even for some of the unconscious decisions that we make. Dave Wan, I adore you. I have been waiting for this, and I mean that sincerely. As soon as I got a hold of your message, I knew right away that this was so important. And please, for those of us who may not know you, tell us why this is your topic and tell us who you are in concert with.
No, I appreciate the kind intro, Lauren. It is my delight to be here, and I can't wait to have a really, really, really fun and great conversation with you. So, I grew up in a immigrant home. My mom and dad were immigrants to South Korea, and when they came to America and while raising my brother and I, they just struggled a lot financially for a lot of different reasons. And the pain that I experienced growing up was something that I didn't want to experience again, or I didn't want anybody else to experience again. So I did my best in my early 20s once I graduated high school and went to college. I wanted to kind of figure out this money thing so I didn't have to experience that again. Well, I thought I was doing the right stuff. I was budgeting my money, making sure I wasn't spending more than what I make because I knew my parents were in a lot of debt and I didn't want to experience that. So I did my absolute best with my willpower to avoid the numbers looking really, really bad on paper. But despite all those numbers looking okay and decent and maybe even healthy, I suffered a massive panic attack in 2016 that was like that put me in a tailspin and like really confused me as to why I was feeling that way, even though I thought I was good with money. And it just brought up a lot of emotions that were unaddressed, all subconsciously, and it just forced me to really understand what was happening behind the scenes that I just never really experienced or really even knew before. And so that's kind of like how it started. And I just realized that there was a huge emotional connection between why we spend or save the way we do. And all of that is driven by the subconscious brain, which is primarily rooted in our childhood and upbringing. And so once I made that connection, I was able to really dig deep into my history and go, oh, that's why I was thinking this way, or that's why I was thinking that way. And it all has a very strong connection between events and experiences and exposures that we've had in our upbringing. And so for the longest time, I'm like, I think I'm doing this money thing right, but how come I'm not doing it right? And I just felt like I was bad with money, even though on paper it didn't look that way. And my mission now is to tell people that they're not bad with money because so many people think they're bad with money in a lot of different ways.
So I want to talk a little bit about the messaging of what it meant for you to hear third party through your parents, how you knew that they were struggling, like what did they say, what did it feel like? But also what I would love to partner that with too, because so many of the folks that are in our listeners, in the years in our audience are people who by and large are looking to make more money in their next opportunity and may even be thinking, I need to make up for lack of compensation over X period of time because I've been staying in this job and those increases have been so marginal. And the messages that you would share with them, because we all know intellectually that just because you're making more money doesn't necessarily mean the affiliated expected messages that could come with making more money. So help us understand what that disconnect is when you say, I got all these messages and how they play out when we are trying to get more money.
Yeah, so growing up, my parents didn't really tell us that they were struggling. Some of the language that I would hear is we can't afford it, or you can't have it right now, or I remember growing up going to a swimming pool. This is like elementary school. Going to a swimming pool was a luxury, and the closest swimming pool was not far away, but like the only ones we would have access to was a hotel that was kind of dinky out there, and that hotel had a swimming pool, and I just remember, like, man, like I wish we could go to a swimming pool that's like right by our house, but it was like really far away. So a lot of these things weren't really said through words, but it was shown through action, like the swimming pool example, or we don't really take any luxurious trips, or I also remember my neighbor having like a really nice bike that he got for a gift, and I didn't have one. So I saw something that somebody else had that I didn't have. So I was like, okay, there's a contrast there. I remember this is like my social etiquette as a young kid was pretty bad, I guess. So like I would walk up and like grab a kid's bike and start riding around because I really wanted to test it out. And he's like, "What are you doing? That's my bike." And I'm like, "Oh shoot, it is yours. I don't have one." So those situations like that like help me realize there's my parents were struggling, but I didn't really know the extent of like how bad they were struggling. And then um yeah, so those thoughts were always in my mind growing up. And then as far as money goes, more income goes, I've learned over time that more income doesn't necessarily solve money problems. For example, I went to the Air Force Academy, graduated as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. Um, I was making a certain amount of money at that time. Now, what my income is and all that stuff, that's public information. So you could go online, but essentially I promoted from a second lieutenant to first lieutenant to then the captain, and my base pay, my base income essentially doubled over that 4-year period. Well,
Mm.
I remember like as a second lieutenant, I'm like, I wish I made more money.
Mm-hmm.
And then 4 years later, I doubled my income and I still felt the same way. So I had to look back on myself and go, why am I feeling this way? And it's because the emotional and the behavioral money dynamics that are within us form some sort of like a foundation for how we feel, think, act, believe with money. And if that is not firm and set and healthy, it doesn't really matter what's above it. It doesn't matter if you have $1 million or $5 million. I know some people that make millions of dollars. I feel terrible. And it's because they haven't really addressed the emotional and the behavioral money dynamics that's within them. That's not healthy. Right. And
So
so I
can
take a look
you
at,
also help us summarize or codify, like, what are the, like, when we for example, because I think many of us, I think it's probably very common, okay, we can't afford this, right? Like, I would imagine there are a lot of parents, and myself included, that have said that before. And so how do those things potentially impact us as we start getting older? How do they live in the crevices of decision making? And then as we are in our careers, and I think this is such an important point that you make in your TEDx, right? Our relationships with money also influence our leadership. Like, it's
it.
not clean. It's not clean. It's not like, oh, I behave like this over here when I have this, financial expectation at my work, because I'm carting around some of these other things. So help us to understand how these messages become pervasive and then part of our unconscious decision making.
Yeah, so a really fascinating study by the University of Cambridge, uh, they did a while back, and they determined that a lot of our core money habits and behaviors are set by the time we turn 7 years old. So all the experiences and exposures that we've had as a young child become stored into our brain, and that over time manifests itself and become hardwired into our brain, and then um, that results in us behaving and acting in a certain way, right? And all those memories, there's a great book titled The Body Keeps a Score. I mean, like, literally every single experience that you've had, whether you remember it or you don't, your body is going to store it, right? And that's usually stored in the subconscious area of your brain. And then that just becomes hardwired into your brain. So when you take a look at the picture of a brain, you see all those nooks and crannies and grooves, right? Like, those are essentially hardwired memories that are forming and shaping you and how you're going to react and behave and think and all that stuff over time, right? And so I'm a firm believer that your behaviors with money and how you behave with money also translates to other areas in life. So the reason why money is such a taboo topic is because it literally reveals every single thing about you. You
Say
can't hide
more.
from it.
So say more. You're the budget captain, right? Say more about what it reveals, and also why this is, this gets under the skin of a lot of our decisions, especially in our careers, whether we're in transition, whether we're already in a job, whether we are thinking about investing in a coach or any kind of program that's going to upskill us. Because I'm just going to come clean right now. I hear this all the time. It bothers me. It blows my mind that we have all these things. And I said this on our call like last week, right? Help me out here. You pay for car insurance, you pay for home insurance, you pay for life insurance, you pay for health insurance. And then something happens and you don't have any insurance for your career, which is funding all the other insurances.
Yeah. So when I say, so money is a funny thing. You never really touch it, but so many of us, not so many, all of us put so much of our identity and our worth in it. And it literally impacts every aspect of our lives. And so when I say that money is a taboo topic because it literally reveals every single thing about us, I'm talking about your tendency to be very selfish, your tendency to unforgive, your tendency
Mm,
to be generous, your tendency to be kind. Like that'll all be revealed through money,
mm,
right? And so that will also translate. So if you have let's say, a scarcity mindset or an abundant mindset or a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, whatever that is, whatever that looks like, that'll also translate to something else. So if you want to fix your behavior, as let's say let's say you need a coach as you transition from one career to another, and that money, let's say you do have money in the bank but you're like scared to use that money. It's important to understand why there's hesitation behind you being scared to use that money. Like, where is that fear coming from, and what is it rooted in? And it's really
mhm,
important to understand your history and the stories that you've been collecting over time, and then how those stories are then manifesting to how you behave now. Um,
mhm,
because if you're not going to invest in your career, or you're not going to invest in insurance one way or another, or you're not going to invest in marketing services for your company when you know you need it, that's a money issue,
mm.
right?
And what's the
And
issue?
no,
What is it? Is it just scarcity mindset? I don't mean to minimize it. Is it just
yeah,
scarcity mindset? What is I mean, that sounds
it
like
could
the
it could be a lot of things, but it's important to understand where that fear originated from,
mhm, mhm.
right? Right. It's really, really important to understand where that fear originated from. And so, if I could share a story,
Please,
um,
please.
if I could share a story, this is not a story that's going to relate to like your exact topic right now. But what I could say is, um, different versions of this story are everywhere, right? And so it could apply across the board. A while back, when I used to do one-on-one coaching, had a client who had uh, over $25,000 in their savings account,
Mhm,
all while they had about $4,000 in credit card debt.
mhm.
And so the easy answer is to take that money from your savings and then pay off your credit card debt, because your credit card interest rate is really, really high. Your interest rate on your savings is really, really low. So mathematically
Right,
speaking, you add those two together, you're like, I need to take care of my credit card debt, and you're good to go.
right.
So that's a very practical solution. But my client was not willing to do that, or even if this client was willing, it was very, very uncomfortable. So it was really important to understand why that was happening. So I dug into her really deep history. And it turns out, when she was really, really young, her dad, she grew up in poverty, but her dad, whenever he brought food to the house, um, all five of the kids would share the food and ration it out, and they would hold it with a tight fist. And the reason why they did that was because they didn't know when they were going to get food next. So they
Mm,
saw the food as a sense of security. So it didn't matter if like there was chaos in this person's life that was happening around them. The food was their sense of security, and they were not willing to let it go. And that pattern is evident in many areas of this client's life, to include what's happening right now, or not now, but before, which was holding on to the savings as if it was her sense of security while her credit card was ballooning. So one of the questions I asked was, do you see your credit card as something entirely separate? It's not even like part of the equation. And she said yes. So if you take a look back at the history, you're like, yes, she had a scarcity mindset. Yes, she had a lot of fear. And the answer right now that you're going to hear a lot on social media and stuff is, oh, just have a growth mindset and abundant mindset and you'll be good. Just turn it on. And while it's easy to say that and consciously think that, 95% of our brain is actually subconscious. So our thinking brain, even though we do have a very logical brain, it's not what drives our everyday decision making, because our subconscious brain, which is essentially a hard drive filled with emotions and feelings and experiences, all the above, like literally packed with every little thing in your history, that's what's driving your behavior, right? So how
So
you react to
what happened when she was able to connect those dots? Like,
so
now
she
she
so she,
knows that there's an affiliation with the meaning behind the way her finances are allocated. What happened?
yes, yes. So for the longest time, she was very angry at her dad. How come our dad couldn't feed us regularly? How come our dad couldn't give us more food? And as a young kid, you don't understand everything. You don't have all this context. So she held that anger against her dad for the longest time. And subconsciously, that was like just being built in her. And that was putting her in flight or flight mode whenever she got into a situation where she was like, "Oh, this is really important to me, and I'm unwilling to let go of it." And so the first thing she had to do was learn to detach herself and distance herself from that emotion that was attacking her dad, because the way she was acting now was subconsciously in retaliation of what happened in the past. And so once she forgave her dad and kind of worked through that, those emotions like really started to not affect her as much. So that takes time. And once she was able to do that, now she could implement all these other habits so
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't trigger her like it used to in the past,
Mm-hmm.
right? One thing I like to say is, this is, people like to put a label on things and say, this is a very practical thing. Here's a practical solution. But the problem is, a lot of these problems aren't practical.
Mm-hmm.
They're emotional problems. And you cannot solve an emotional problem with a practical solution. It has
Okay.
to be an emotional
That
solution.
deserves a repeat. Say it
So
again, Dave, for the people in the back.
you need an emotional solution for an emotional problem. These are emotional problems. You cannot solve it with a practical solution. It has to be an emotional solution. First, imagine building a house and all you're worried about is how good the windows are going to be, how good the kitchen's going to be, how good your retirement's going to be. For example, I'm just kind of like giving other examples now.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't get the foundation in, none of that stuff matters,
Right.
right? So you could have
So,
an, you could, like, who cares about the color of the house on the outside if you don't even have a foundation there? Your house is built on sand, and then the house is going to fall apart. Like, who cares what the color of the house is going to be? It doesn't. None of it matters until you get the foundation right, right?
mm-hmm.
Like I have a
Exactly.
friend, I have a friend who was trying to sell his house and had a really hard time. The house was beautiful, but the foundation was so jacked up that even though the house was beautiful, nobody wanted to buy it.
Mm.
So the foundation matters. Your starting point matters. So when you're trying to deal with money issues, I believe every single person on this earth has the ability to reach after his or her goals, reach after his or her dreams, without any hesitation or anything in the way. But the reason why
Mhm.
people think they're bad with money is because there is this mental barrier that is deeply
Mhm.
rooted in their brain, from their subconscious brain, that is rooted all the way back from their childhood. And once you're able to address that, I believe every single person on this earth has the ability to reach their dreams.
Mhm.
And I felt the same way because I felt like I was stuck. I was afraid to
Mhm.
invest my money. I was afraid to
Mhm.
invest my money.
And what were you afraid to invest your money in? What was the hesitation? And I guess, more importantly, what were you holding on to? I mean, I know you were holding
Yes.
on to the fear, but what were you I mean, so were you afraid to spend the money? Because I know from your TEDx, right? You had a house, so you spent the money there, but now you're in the middle of this frenzy, this panic attack, and let's be honest, like, I'm using my air quotes, you had all the things. So what are you afraid to spend the money on? You already spent it.
Uh, I was afraid of losing it. I was afraid of
Ah.
I was afraid of losing it. I was afraid of the unknown. One thing that I did not mention in my TED Talk, which I will tell you right now, is I listed my house for sale 2 weeks after I bought it.
What? You listed your house after you bought it within the first 2 weeks.
Yes.
And tell us why you did that. What was the thinking behind that, friend?
So I didn't realize I was doing this, but subconsciously I was running away from fear.
Mm.
Fear of the unknown, fear of uncertainty. What if what if home prices crash and I lose this house and I go bankrupt as a result of it? Now, none of this is logical, and I knew none of it was logical, but I, I wanted to escape that house to move into a small one-bedroom apartment that I felt comfortable in. Now, I was escaping fear. That's what I was doing. And so the fact that I listed my house and nobody bought it forced me to really address my fear head on. And to answer your earlier question, when I graduated from the Air Force Academy and started making money, I saved a lot of it, right? And I saved a
Wait,
lot of it for the
I'm
wrong
challenging. Did you
reasons.
save or did you hoard?
I hoarded I hoarded a lot of money. And you know, when people are saving money, I mean, you could be high-fiving them, right? Like, "Good job, you saved a lot of money, you got a lot of money in the bank, da 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 da." And while I believe saving money is great, over-saving can be really bad. But it's really important to understand the emotions behind why you're doing what you do. And for me, I was over-saving because I was fearful of uncertainty and fearful of the unknown. And I had money to put into my 401k and my Roth IRA, but I skipped a lot of those years because I was afraid of losing it, right? So like the client that I had, she was holding onto her savings account for dear life, and I was doing the
Mhm.
same exact thing. I was doing the same exact thing.
Mhm.
And um, the thing that I said earlier is it's a very emotional problem, and everybody these days is trying to solve that with a practical solution, and you can't do that, right? And so when you're not investing in your career in the right way, and like putting your money in different resources to like elevate your career, make sure your career is in a stable path and all that stuff, if you're not doing it, I mean, maybe there's like numbers and education behind it that you might not realize, and I think that's easy to learn, but but adopting what you learn and like implementing it into your life, that's what's different, right? And so if there's hesitation there, it's important to understand why that's happening and where it's coming from.
One of my favorite things that you talk about is, and I want you to walk us through this because I think that this is not only a great visual, but a great exercise that demonstrates the practical versus the emotional, is I'm gonna call it the credit card test, right? Don't you like how I just renamed your story? So the credit card test where you go through your statement and then the the 3 questions, right? Like, like, tell us about this. Like, you can't be hoarding this because this is the best part as far as I'm concerned. Tell us what this is all about and why it both illustrates the difference and how you can use it to be able to potentially realign so that you are investing, spending money, not over saving, not under saving. Like, how is this little exercise so revealing in terms of our behavior?
Yeah, so a lot of people talk about needs and wants. I actually think that's a terrible question because us as human beings, we're going to try to justify a want and your brain is going to like somehow come up with these crazy scenarios and reasons to make that want a need, right? Just imagine like going into Target and you're like, I don't know if I should buy this. This is a need or this is a want, but you're going to try to justify yourself and come up with all these logical reasons as to why that want is actually a need. We do it all the time. We do it all the time.
All the
So
time.
there's this massive gray area that's like, so it's not just needs or wants. There's this massive gray area that people are just really confused, and those needs and wants kind of go back and forth. So a really good way, I'm going to break this down into like multiple levels, is top level. Look at your bank statements,
Mhm.
right? And if you want to know what your needs are versus your wants are, you're going to have to go through these questions. So as you go down your bank statement, the first question you're going to ask yourself is,
Here.
Lauren,
Yes.
the first question you're going to ask yourself is, I mean, you could do this multiple ways, but the first question is, do I have any guilt or shame from buying this?
Okay.
Imagine you going to the, you know, the grocery store and you buy a bag of chips on the way home and you just munch the chips and you eat it all and you're like, I
Dave, can
regret
we
doing
come up with
that.
something better than that? Like a really expensive pair of shoes, or I don't have as much shame about potato chips as I do about spending a amount of money on a pair of shoes or something like that.
Yeah. So like let's say you bought a car. Let's say a line item in that bank statement was a car.
Okay.
And you drive it off the lot and a couple weeks later you're like, man, I wish I never bought this. Right? So if you have any ounce of guilt or shame around it, then you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't do it. And another question, so if you say yes to any of those line items, then you should just circle it or highlight it or whatever. And the second question is, does this come as a surprise to me?
Mm.
So if you look back on your bank statements from like 3 to 6 months ago and you don't remember buying it, then it wasn't important to you. Because a lot of people, they just buy stuff left and right and do not remember what they bought.
Is that like the
So,
QVC syndrome?
or the Amazon finger
Amazon.
syndrome, yeah.
Yeah.
but
Okay.
but if you don't remember buying it, then that's a problem, right? So I would consider that a want, not a need.
Mm.
So I would circle that too. And then the final question is, was I able to live without it before?
Mm.
And if you say, yeah, I didn't need it before, then you circle that as well. So if you take a look at your bank statement and you see all the ones that are not circled and the ones that are circled, the ones that are not circled would be considered a need, and the ones that are circled are considered a want. Now,
Mm.
if a credit card line item was $1,000 trip to Costco or $1,000 trip to Target or whatever, or Amazon, and if you had that receipt, you could do the same exact exercise with that receipt. So not just the bank statement, but now we're going deeper.
Right.
So now you can go on the receipt and then go over that. I actually had
Mm.
a former client who said, Dave, family of 5 here, We go to Walmart to get our groceries every single month. We spend about $1,500 a month on groceries. There is no way. So we need to find a way to reduce this. But Dave, there is no way we're going to reduce it. And I had her go through that exercise with a grocery bill that she had from months ago. And she was able to do this exercise and start realizing that a lot of the stuff that she bought was not a need. It was a want.
It was a
And
want,
so,
and it was a want in effort for potentially what to happen. Like in the want bucket of the emotional piece, is it to reward ourselves? What lives in the want? I mean, I know that there's a lot of things, but at the top of that area.
yeah, so in the want category, I don't think you should spend money on like things that you just need. Like you should treat yourself and have fun. Like that's like life is about like not just saving all the money and like trying to use it when you're older, but you should go enjoy yourself. But if you're doing it in an unhealthy way where you're constantly in credit card debt or you're constantly stressed or you're constantly not saving more of what you make, then there needs to be some evaluation. When you take a look at like I bought something that I didn't need, and it's important to understand why that happened. So I'm going to tell a very personal story, one that you might have seen. But I bought a truck coming fresh from an overseas deployment in the military, and it was a 2013 F-150. I bought it because I wanted to pack my truck and move it across the country, and um, I wanted to uh, haul things, and I also wanted to travel with friends and put them in the car and we could go on fun trips. But the reason why I bought that truck was not because of any of that, was because of my innate desire for people's approval. So when
Mhm.
we buy things in the want bucket that are also classified
Mhm.
as unhealthy, that's also ruining our financial picture or causing you a lot of stress, but you continuously buy these things, it's important to understand why that happens. And so Tsukushi Toyota's 5 why methods is actually a pretty good model, right? So it's like, why were you late for class? I was late for class because there's a lot of traffic. Well, why was there traffic? If you left it early, that you would have missed it. It's because I woke up late. Well, why'd you wake up late? So like, if you keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper, you're going to get to the root cause behind why you had that action and behavior. And so you could use the same methodology for
I
why
get
that
it.
happened with your spending. And a lot of those reasons, if it's unhealthy, is because of our desire for approval, desire for comfort, desire for control, or desire for power. So it's one of those four things
You get to
primarily.
pick from that menu, aren't you lucky? Right? Yeah, no, these are all of this, I think, is I know, and we absolutely want to make sure all of you listeners check out the link below for Dave's TEDx, because I know that money is a touchy issue, but it's not about the immediate defaults. Well, I'm just bad with money. I think we all have kind of used that as a little bit of a placeholder for a lot of other things. I think it's more about what is what is causing you to believe that you're bad with money, and also to address it. So,
And it could
Dave
look
Juan,
different. It could look different for every single person.
and it will look different for every single person. And so, please, everyone, follow Dave on LinkedIn. Check out his TEDx. I know that he's got a lot of tricks up his sleeve. And Dave Juan, I just want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being a great leader, for being a great friend, and being in the Outlier Club, where we're ready to live an extraordinary life. And thanks for being here.
No, I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun, and I appreciate you for having me here.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining today. We appreciate your listening ears. Big time. We ask this: use these tools, not tomorrow, right now, and share them by spreading the love, leaving us a rating and subscribe so you don't miss the next career blast in a half. Most of all, thank you for you.